The war had lasted longer than any human conflict in recorded history. It had spanned generations, reshaped entire civilizations, and turned once thriving worlds into lifeless husks of ash and silence. It had started as an invasion, a simple, one-sided conquest, the kind the Galactic Dominion had executed countless times before. But this time, something was different. Something had changed. The Dominion, an empire that had ruled the stars for millennia, had never lost. Not truly. They had crushed rebellions, annihilated species, and rewritten the political order of the galaxy to suit their needs. They were the architects of civilization as the universe knew it. To them, humanity was nothing more than another footnote, another species to be assimilated, another race to be conquered and forgotten. And at first, it seemed they would succeed. The Dominion's first strike against Earth came without warning. No negotiations, no terms, no attempt at diplomacy. They saw no need for such things. Why waste time bargaining with an inferior race? When they arrived, they did so in force. 17,000 warships emerging from the void like an oncoming storm, their hulls reflecting the light of our sun as they positioned themselves over our cities. Their demand was simple: surrender and submit to the Dominion's rule, or be erased from existence. It should have been an easy choice. Any rational species would have bowed, accepted servitude, and survived. But humanity, we were never rational when it came to our freedom. The first battle was meant to be a slaughter. 3 human ships, the only ones close enough to respond, rushed to intercept the Dominion fleet. It was an act of defiance, not strategy. Those ships were not advanced war vessels. They were barely above exploration grade, fitted with outdated weapons and armor that would not last seconds against the Dominion's firepower. And yet, those 3 ships survived. Not because they overpowered their enemy, but because they fought differently. The Dominion's fleets operated on precision and logic, relying on superior numbers and calculated strategies refined over thousands of years of galactic warfare. But humanity? We fought with something they had never encountered before: pure, reckless unpredictability. The battle was chaos. Human pilots performed maneuvers that defied all reason, darting into enemy formations, executing suicidal attack runs, and targeting weak points the Dominion hadn't even considered vulnerabilities. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to disrupt, to stall, to learn. And in doing so, they survived long enough to send a message. Across Earth's networks, across the remaining colonies, the footage of the battle spread like wildfire. Humanity had seen what was coming, and in that moment, something changed. We didn't cower. We didn't flee. We didn't negotiate. We did what we had always done when faced with impossible odds. We prepared for war. The Dominion assumed it would be a short campaign, a few months at most. They had never encountered a species that could resist them for long. After all, what could a civilization that had barely left its own solar system do against an empire that had existed for millennia? They expected quick battles, planetary bombardments, and unconditional surrenders. What they got was something far worse. They got an enemy that adapted, an enemy that learned. Humanity did not fight like the other species the Dominion had conquered. We did not rely on rigid formations or static doctrines. We took every loss, every battle, every engagement, and we evolved. Our engineers reverse-engineered their technology at terrifying speeds. Our commanders studied their strategies and countered them with unpredictable, asymmetric warfare. We built fleets faster than they could destroy them. We developed weapons, specifically designed to exploit their weaknesses. What started as an invasion turned into a deadlock. And then, slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. For the first time in history, the Galactic Dominion was bleeding. Entire Dominion fleets were lost to human ambushes. Planets they had controlled for centuries fell to insurgencies, their own weapons turned against them. Their commanders, so used to unquestioned superiority, found themselves facing an enemy that did not fear death, did not break under pressure, and did not stop fighting even when outnumbered 100-1. The war that was supposed to be swift and decisive dragged on for years, then decades. The Dominion's oldest leaders, those who had once spoken of humanity with amusement, began to speak of us in whispers. They called us the unyielding, the Death Worlders, the species that refused to be conquered. But at what cost? Humanity had paid for every victory in blood. Entire colonies were lost. Earth itself suffered bombardments that wiped out entire continents. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. The war was not just fought in space. It was fought on the ground, in the ruins of fallen worlds, in the vacuum of airless moons where the bodies of the fallen drifted eternally in the darkness. The Dominion, faced with an enemy they could not break, did the only thing they knew how to do. They escalated. They unleashed weapons of unimaginable destruction, devices that could rip apart planetary crusts, burn atmospheres away, and erase entire ecosystems in an instant. They thought it would finally break us, that humanity would see the cost of defiance and surrender, before there was nothing left. They were wrong. Because that was the moment we stopped fighting for survival. That was the moment we stopped fighting for defense. That was the moment we decided that if the Dominion wanted total war, we would give it to them. And we would not stop until the empire that had started this war was nothing more than a memory. And so, humanity built something new, something that would change the course of the war forever. It was more than a weapon. It was more than technology. It was the culmination of every battle, every loss, every lesson we had learned. It was the ultimate response to an empire that had once believed itself to be invincible. And when it was unleashed, the galaxy would never be the same. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles 849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. Humanity had found the key to victory. But what was it? What was the ultimate weapon that would finally bring the war to an end? And what price would we pay for wielding such power? The answer is something no one in the galaxy could have ever imagined. The war had reached a tipping point. The Galactic Dominion, once thought to be an unstoppable force, was no longer winning. But humanity was not truly winning either. The battlefield had become something else, something worse than defeat. It had become a never-ending war of attrition. Every world lost was paid for in blood. Every victory only led to another battle. For the first time in galactic history, the Dominion found itself unable to crush an enemy. They had fought wars before, but they had never fought a species like us. Every other civilization that had dared to resist them had eventually broken. But humanity? We didn't just resist. We adapted. We evolved. And worst of all, we learned. The Dominion's advantage in technology and numbers was undeniable, but it was not infinite. Unlike humanity, they had grown complacent. Their military strategies had remained largely unchanged for thousands of years. Why change perfection? Why innovate when victory was always assured? That was their mistake. They did not expect a species that could take their weapons, their tactics, and their ships, and turn them against them in a matter of years. At first, it was small things. Human engineers reverse-engineered Dominion armor plating, integrating it into our warships. Scientists studied their energy weapons and found ways to not just replicate them, but improve them. The Dominion had spent centuries refining their technology. Humanity took those advancements and pushed them further in mere months. The war that should have been one-sided was no longer a war of conquest. It had become a race to see which side could outthink the other first, and humanity had an advantage the Dominion had never encountered before: our unpredictability. They had studied our history, but they had not understood it. They saw our wars, our conflicts, our endless cycles of violence, and dismissed them as primitive barbarism. What they failed to realize was that war was part of what made humanity what it was. We had never known peace for long, never existed in comfort for centuries as they had. Our greatest strengths were born from adversity. Every war we had fought had forced us to become better, to become stronger. And now, faced with an existential threat unlike anything before, we did what we had always done. We innovated. The Dominion still had the upper hand in sheer firepower, but now they were afraid. Their war machine was built for efficiency, not for chaos. And we had turned the war into chaos. We didn't just attack where they expected. We struck at their supply lines, their communication networks, their infrastructure. We used guerrilla tactics in space, launching unpredictable hit-and-run attacks before vanishing into the void. They called it dishonorable. We called it survival. Entire planets became battlegrounds. The Dominion soldiers, genetically engineered for obedience and discipline, had never encountered an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. They expected wars to be fought in the open, with clear rules of engagement. Instead, they faced resistance fighters that used every trick in the book: ambushes, sabotage, psychological warfare. The Dominion had never considered the possibility that an enemy might set entire cities ablaze just to deny them control. They had never fought an enemy willing to turn entire planets into death traps, filled with automated defenses, self-replicating, war machines, and hidden strike teams that refused to surrender. For every world they bombed, we made them bleed for it. For every city they occupied, we made them question whether it was worth the cost. They had thought humanity's resistance would crumble after the first wave of destruction. Instead, we had become something new, something they didn't understand, something they couldn't stop. But even with all our victories, we were still fighting a war we could not sustain forever. The Dominion, though bleeding, was still vast. They had more ships, more soldiers, more resources than humanity could ever hope to match. We had bought ourselves time, but time was not enough. And that was when the idea was born. The weapon that would change everything did not start as a weapon. It started as a question. A single question asked in the depths of war-torn Earth, in the underground bunkers where humanity's greatest minds worked desperately to find an answer. How do you end a war against an enemy that will never stop? The answer was not what anyone expected. It was not another fleet, another superweapon, another technological breakthrough. No. It was something else. Something terrifying. Because humanity had finally realized the truth about the Dominion. For all their power, for all their might, they were still bound by one thing: fear. Fear of change, fear of chaos, fear of losing control. And so, humanity built a weapon not to destroy ships, not to destroy planets, but to destroy the very foundation of the Dominion itself. A weapon of thought. A weapon of rebellion. A weapon that could not be stopped by shields, by fleets, by armies. The ultimate weapon was ready. And when it was unleashed, the war would never be the same again. But what was it? What had humanity created that could bring an empire to its knees without firing a single shot? The answer is coming. The Dominion had always believed itself to be eternal. Their empire had existed for thousands of years, spanning countless worlds and species, bound together by an unshakable hierarchy. They ruled through fear, through control, through the knowledge that no one could oppose them. Their fleets were invincible, their armies unstoppable, their technology unmatched. Every species they encountered had fallen in line, either through submission or annihilation, and yet, here they were, bleeding, losing, not because humanity was stronger, not because we had more ships or greater numbers, but because we were something they had never faced before. An enemy that refused to break, that refused to follow the rules of war, that fought with a desperation and cunning they could not match. We had turned their own strengths against them, exposed their weaknesses, forced them to fight on our terms. We had shattered their illusion of absolute power, but it still wasn't enough. The Dominion was vast. No matter how many ships we destroyed, how many battles we won, they always had more. Their industrial capacity dwarfed our own. They could afford losses that we could not. We had turned the war into a stalemate, but we could not fight forever. Even as we pushed them back, even as we struck deeper into their territory, we knew that time was against us. And so, humanity turned to something else. Not a fleet, not a bomb, not a weapon of destruction, a weapon of subversion. It started small, a whisper in the dark, a single Dominion outpost, deep in their own space, where something unusual happened. The soldiers stationed there, veterans of the war, hardened and disciplined, began to question, not all at once, not openly, But the reports were clear. A breakdown in morale, a loss of cohesion, an unease they could not explain. At first, the Dominion dismissed it as an anomaly. War fatigue, a minor issue. But then it happened again, and again, and again, across the Dominion. Something was changing. Their soldiers, their citizens, their very foundations, cracks were forming. They did not understand why, but humanity did. Because this was the weapon. It wasn't a virus. Not in the traditional sense. It was an idea, a thought. A question planted so deep into the minds of the Dominion's people that once it took root, it could not be removed. What if everything they had been told was a lie? The Dominion had maintained power through absolute control over information. Their citizens did not know the truth of their history. They did not know how many civilizations had been erased, how many voices had been silenced. They had been taught one thing and one thing only. The Dominion was eternal. The Dominion was absolute. The Dominion was the only way. But now, humanity had found a way to bypass that control. At first, it had been crude. Intercepted Dominion broadcasts were hijacked, altered with subtle distortions, seeded with questions. Not commands, not propaganda, just doubt, the idea that the war was not what it seemed, the idea that their leaders were not infallible, the idea that there was another way. The Dominion, arrogant and sure of their control, ignored it, but they did not understand how dangerous an idea could be. And then, we went further. Captured. Dominion soldiers were not executed. They were not tortured. They were released, but not before being shown the truth. The real history of the empire they served. The records of entire species wiped from existence. The classified files of atrocities committed in the name of order. And then, they were sent home. Most were killed upon return, of course. But some whispered what they had seen. Some could not forget. Some could not obey. The Dominion had no defense against this. Their fleets were mighty, their armies vast. But their empire was built on a foundation that could not withstand doubt. They had ruled through obedience, through certainty. And now, that certainty was gone. Rebellions that should have been crushed in days lasted for months. Insurgencies that had been contained suddenly gained momentum. Entire planets fell silent. No messages, no signals, just a void where once there had been order. And then, one day, the unthinkable happened. A Dominion fleet, one of their greatest, one that had been sent to finally end humanity once and, for all, turned against itself. Ships fired upon their own. Officers executed their commanders. The fleet tore itself apart before it even reached human space. The Dominion was crumbling, but it was not over yet. The Dominion's rulers, in their desperation, did the only thing they could. They abandoned diplomacy, abandoned restraint, abandoned any last illusion of control. They turned to genocide. If humanity could not be conquered, then we would be erased. Every world, every colony, every trace of our existence, wiped clean. They launched an armada greater than anything we had ever seen. It was no longer war. It was extermination. And so, humanity had no choice. The final weapon had been unleashed, but it was not enough to stop what was coming. The Dominion was wounded, but they were still a threat. And so, we would have to strike first. We would have to end the war. We would have to make sure that the Dominion could never rise again. We would have to bring their empire to its knees and destroy it completely. And in doing so, we would become something else. Something more terrifying than even the Dominion could have imagined. The final battle was coming, and when it was over, the galaxy would never be the same again. The Dominion had finally reached the point they had once believed impossible. For the first time in their long history, they were not just losing a war, they were losing control. Their empire, once a monolithic force spanning thousands of star systems, was now fracturing from within. The whispers of doubt, the seeds of rebellion, the cracks in their foundation, all of it had taken root faster than they could contain. But the Dominion had not ruled for millennia without knowing how to deal with threats. When diplomacy failed, they used force. When force failed, They used extermination. And now, backed into a corner, they turned to the only thing left in their arsenal: absolute destruction. The armada they sent against humanity was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Entire battle groups, fleets numbering in the tens of thousands, ships the size of cities, weapons powerful enough to crack planets open like eggs. The Dominion was done trying to subjugate us. Their last command was simple: erase humanity from existence. No survivors, no remnants, no history left behind. The order was given, and the fleets descended upon human space like a cosmic hurricane. We knew they were coming. We had intercepted their transmissions, decrypted their battle plans. Every military strategist, every scientist, every leader on Earth and beyond knew the same truth: we could not stop them. Not conventionally. Even with all our stolen technology, even with all our adaptations, we could not match their sheer numbers. The Dominion had been weakened, yes. They were bleeding, yes. But this was their final push, their last effort to reclaim their empire through brute force. And so, humanity did what it had always done. We did not run, we did not beg, we prepared. The final battle was not a single engagement. It was a campaign, a desperate all-or-nothing fight across multiple fronts. Every world, every station, every hidden outpost had a part to play. The Dominion's fleets arrived to find a battlefield. That was not what they had expected. The planets they targeted were not filled with terrified civilians waiting to be slaughtered. They were fortresses. Cities had been transformed into death traps. Civilian ships had been converted into mobile battle platforms. Even the stars themselves were turned into weapons. The Dominion had always believed they were the superior force, that their advanced tactics and overwhelming power would be enough. But war had changed. We had changed. The moment they entered human space, the slaughter they had planned turned into something else. A massacre of their own forces. Humanity had not spent the war simply fighting. We had studied them, learned from them. We knew how they thought, how they reacted, how they deployed their fleets. And we had used that knowledge to set the most elaborate trap in galactic history. The Dominion's armada advanced, expecting to meet us in open space. Instead, they found themselves walking into a labyrinth of false signals, hidden minefields, and defenses they had never encountered before. We did not fight them ship for ship. We did not engage them in a battle of attrition. We led them into chaos, into a war they could not control. They tried to bombard planets, only to find that every surface was layered with kinetic barriers and automated countermeasures that turned their own bombardments into a liability. They attempted planetary landings, only to find themselves in urban war zones designed to grind down entire legions. Their massive warships, built for frontal assaults, were flanked and torn apart by swarms of smaller, faster vessels that struck from the shadows before vanishing. But all of this was just the beginning. Because humanity's true plan had not yet been revealed, the ultimate weapon was not just an idea anymore. It had evolved. The Dominion thought they were fighting a war for survival, but they didn't realize what they were really facing. This was not a war of fleets or planets. This was a war of identity, of existence, and the Dominion was about to lose itself. For centuries, they had relied on their absolute control over information, their manipulation of history, their suppression of free thought. That was the true heart of their power. And now, that heart was failing. The seeds of rebellion we had planted had grown into full-fledged uprisings. Former Dominion soldiers turned on their commanders. Entire Dominion-aligned worlds refused to send reinforcements. Some even joined humanity's side, fighting against the very empire they had once called home. The Dominion could not comprehend what was happening. Their entire species had been conditioned to obey, to follow without question. And yet, they were breaking. Not all of them, but enough. It was the moment we had been waiting for. While the Dominion's fleets battled us in space, humanity launched the final phase of its plan. The weapon was unleashed, not as a bomb, not as a virus, but as a simple truth. The Dominion was already dead. Across their empire, encrypted transmissions began to spread, revealing the extent of their losses, the crumbling infrastructure, the planets lost to rebellion. The truth they had tried to bury for so long was now flooding their networks. Leaders who had always spoken with absolute authority were exposed as desperate, fallible, weak. The illusion of their invincibility shattered, and with it, their empire collapsed. The fleets that had come to destroy us suddenly had no direction. No orders, no purpose. Some continued fighting, but others hesitated. Some turned on each other, some simply stopped. And that was when humanity delivered the final blow. We did not destroy their fleets with weapons. We destroyed them with certainty. The certainty that their time was over, that the dominion they had fought for no longer existed, that even if they won the battle, they had already lost the war, and in the end, they did what no one had ever expected. They surrendered. Not all of them. Not immediately. But the chain reaction had begun. Commanders who had once sworn loyalty to the Dominion abandoned their posts. Entire fleets defected. The core worlds of the Dominion, once the center of galactic power, were now divided, leaderless, paralyzed by indecision. The war was over. But humanity was not done yet, because we had learned something about ourselves in this war. We had been the underdogs, the rebels, the survivors. But now we were something else. The Dominion had feared us for our brutality, for our defiance, for our refusal to be controlled. And in defeating them, we had become what they had feared most, a new power, a new force in the galaxy. And as the dust settled, one question remained. What would we do with that power? The war was over. The Dominion had fallen, not in a blaze of glory, not in some climactic last stand, but in the slow, agonizing collapse of everything they had built. Their fleets had not been destroyed, they had been abandoned. Their armies had not been defeated in battle, they had crumbled from within. Their people had not been conquered, they had turned against their own rulers. The Dominion, the empire that had once stretched across the stars, was now little more than a collection of fractured systems, aimless fleets, and desperate remnants trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. Humanity had won. But what did that victory mean? For the first time in history, we were not the underdogs, not the desperate survivors fighting for our place in the galaxy. We were something else now, something dangerous. The most feared species in existence. We had done what no other civilization had ever managed. We had taken down an empire that had stood for millennia, and the galaxy had watched us do it. Some saw us as liberators. Worlds that had suffered under Dominion rule for generations now looked to humanity as their saviors. Rebellions that had once been crushed were now triumphant, their people free, for the first time in their history. The whispers of doubt that had torn the Dominion apart had given rise to something new, a movement, a belief that the old way of rule by force was over, that something better could take its place. But others saw something far more terrifying. Because if humanity could destroy the Dominion, what else were we capable of? The surviving species of the galaxy, those who had once feared the Dominion, now feared us. Even those who had fought alongside us in the final days of the war could not ignore what we had become. They had seen the way we fought, the way we had used not just weapons, but ideas to dismantle an empire from the inside. They had seen how we had turned their greatest fleets against themselves, how we had made soldiers question their own loyalties, how we had not just defeated our enemy, but unmade them. And the worst part? They knew we had done it by choice. Humanity had not needed some superweapon, some doomsday device, some overwhelming show of force. No, we had done something far more terrifying. We had looked at the Dominion, studied its weaknesses, and exploited them with absolute precision. We had fought, not just to survive, but to ensure that the Dominion could never rise again. And now, with their empire in ruins, the galaxy had only one question left. Would humanity stop, or had we become something far worse than the Dominion ever was? The truth was, no one knew the answer. Not even us. Earth had changed. The colonies had changed. The very soul of humanity had changed. We had spent so long fighting, surviving, clawing our way through this war that we had never stopped to think about what came next. We had seen the horrors of the Dominion and promised ourselves that we would never become like them. But now, As we stood victorious, we had a choice to make. The remains of the Dominion were still out there. Their leadership had been shattered, their fleets scattered, but not all of them had surrendered. Some still fought on, clinging to the remnants of their once great empire. Some refused to accept that the war was over. And there were those among humanity who believed that we should finish the job, that we should hunt down every last Dominion loyalist, every surviving ship, every broken piece of their civilization, and wipe it from existence. That we should ensure they could never return. After all, wasn't that what they had tried to do? To us. But others saw a different path. They argued that we had already won, that we had proven our strength, our intelligence, our ability to reshape the very fabric of war itself, that we did not need to become conquerors to secure our place in the galaxy, that if we truly wanted to break the cycle of endless war, we had to show the galaxy something no empire had ever shown before: mercy. And so, humanity stood at a crossroads. Would we rule through fear, as the Dominion had done? Would we take their place, forge our own empire, reshape the galaxy in our image? Or would we choose another path? The decision was not just ours to make, because the galaxy was watching. Some worlds had already begun swearing allegiance to humanity, desperate for protection, for stability, for leadership. Others had begun secretly plotting against us, believing that if they did not act now, they would be next. Rumors spread of new alliances forming, of old enemies uniting, not out of loyalty to the Dominion, but out of sheer terror of what humanity might do next. And in the shadows, something even more dangerous was happening. The weapon we had unleashed, the idea that had broken the Dominion, was still spreading. We had turned their own people against them, but in doing so, we had started something we could no longer control. Across the remains of the Dominion, entire planets were descending into chaos. Civil wars erupted as factions fought over what would come next. Some wanted to rebuild, others wanted revenge, and some wanted something entirely new. The fall of the Dominion had not just created a power vacuum, it had shattered the entire balance of the galaxy. And now, everyone, humanity included, was scrambling to figure out what came next. Would we become rulers? Would we become peacekeepers? Or would we become the next great threat? No one knew the answer. Not yet. But one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer just another species in the galaxy. We were the future, and the future was terrifying. The war was over, but the galaxy was still burning. The Dominion's collapse had not brought peace. It had brought something far more dangerous. Chaos. The empire that had once held the stars together, however cruelly, was gone. And in its absence, the old order was unraveling at a terrifying speed. The Dominion had ruled with an iron grip, suppressing conflicts before they could begin, crushing rebellions before they could spread. But now, those chains had been broken, and the result was anarchy. Entire star systems, once controlled with absolute authority, now stood leaderless. Old rivalries flared up overnight. Civil wars erupted as factions fought over the ruins of a dead empire. Former Dominion governors declared themselves independent warlords, each claiming to be the rightful heir to the throne. Some sought to rebuild the empire in their own image, to reclaim the power they had lost. Others wanted only destruction, revenge against those they blamed for their downfall. But the most dangerous part? None of them feared the Dominion anymore. They feared us. Humanity was no longer just a survivor, no longer just a species fighting for its place in the stars. We were now the most powerful force in the galaxy, not because we had the largest fleets, not because we had the most advanced technology, but because we had done the impossible. We had broken an empire that had ruled for millennia. We had rewritten the rules of war itself, and everyone knew it. Some sought our protection. Entire planets swore allegiance to humanity, begging to be brought under our banner before the chaos reached them. Some of these worlds had once been enemies. Dominion colonies that had fought against us now turned to us as their only hope for stability. Others, longtime allies and sympathizers, now looked to humanity as the natural successor to the Dominion. The galaxy needed order. Someone had to bring it. And to many, There was only one obvious choice, but not everyone agreed. There were those who believed that humanity was the next great threat, that if we could take down the Dominion, we could take down anyone, that we were too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed to rise unchecked. Whispers spread of secret meetings, of former Dominion commanders reaching out to their old enemies, trying to forge alliances against the one power they now feared above all others. Us. We had thought the war was over. It wasn't. It had simply changed shape. And now we faced a choice. Humanity could take the throne. We could reshape the galaxy in our own image, impose our own vision of order upon the chaos. We had earned the right. We had the power to do it. Some argued that we had no choice, that if we did not take control, someone else would. That the galaxy would descend into endless wars, each faction fighting for dominance until another empire rose from the ashes. And who would that be? A Dominion remnant? A coalition of old enemies? Something worse? No, some said. We could not allow that. We had to lead. But others saw a different path. Humanity had spent its entire history fighting for freedom. First, from our own oppressors, then from the Dominion. If we took the throne, if we became rulers, would we not become the very thing we had fought to destroy? Would we not become just another empire, another power imposing its will on the weak? No, they argued. We could not rule. We had to let the galaxy decide its own fate, and so humanity stood divided. A faction within our ranks, politicians, military, leaders, even some of the scientists and strategists who had engineered our victory, began to push for expansion. They argued that humanity should step into the vacuum of power before someone else did. That we should claim not just our own survival, but our dominance. But another faction resisted. They believed we should pull back, withdraw from the galactic stage, focus on rebuilding our own worlds, our own people. Let the galaxy fight its own battles. We had won our freedom. Why waste it trying to rule over those who had once tried to wipe us out? And then, there were the wild cards. Some among humanity had begun to think differently. They had seen how the Dominion had ruled, how they had used control and manipulation as their weapons. And they had seen how we had won, not through brute force, but through the power of an idea. What if that idea could be used for something more? What if, instead of ruling through war, through fleets and armies, we shaped the galaxy through thought, through influence? What if we became something new? A hidden power, a force that did not conquer but guided. A shadow empire, invisible, untouchable, working behind the scenes to shape the future of the stars. Some saw this as the only way forward. A galactic empire would invite resistance, invite war. But an unseen hand, a force that directed the fate of civilizations without them ever realizing it, that was true power. The idea was dangerous, the idea was tempting, and the idea was spreading. Because while humanity debated its future, the rest of the galaxy was not waiting. The Dominion's remnants were still out there, licking their wounds, gathering strength. Some sought revenge, some sought redemption, some simply wanted to survive, and they were not the only ones. New coalitions were forming. The old powers of the galaxy, the species that had once been beneath the Dominion's boot, were now rising, in their own right. Some had fought alongside us, others had only watched, waiting for the dust to settle. And now, they saw their chance. The balance of power had been shattered. The future was uncertain. And humanity was the deciding factor. What we did next would determine the fate of the galaxy. Would we take the throne? Would we disappear into the shadows? Would we withdraw, leaving the stars to their own chaos? Or would we forge a path no one had ever walked before? The war had ended. But the next battle, the battle for the soul of humanity, was only just beginning. The galaxy was watching, waiting. Every species, every world, every faction that had survived the collapse of the Dominion stood at the edge of uncertainty, their eyes fixed on humanity. Not out of admiration, not out of respect, but out of fear. We had done the impossible. We had broken an empire that had stood for millennia. And now, the question that haunted every star system, every leader, every surviving warship drifting in the void, was this. What would humanity do next? Would we claim the throne, establish a new empire to rule over the ashes of the old? Would we turn inward, withdraw from the galaxy, and leave the stars to their chaos? Or would we forge a different path, one that no species had ever dared to walk before? For weeks, the leaders of humanity debated. Generals, scientists, strategists, politicians, and even the soldiers who had fought in the final battles, all gathered in hidden war rooms, deep within Earth's fortified command centers. Every option was considered. Every consequence was weighed. Every possible future was imagined. And then, humanity made its decision. We would not take the throne. We would not claim an empire. We would not withdraw into the shadows. Instead, we would do something that had never been done before. We would rewrite the future of the galaxy. We had seen the Dominion rule through fear, through force, through absolute control. We had seen how empires, no matter how powerful, always fell, brought down not by enemies but by their own corruption, their own arrogance, their own inability to adapt. So we would not make the same mistake. We would not rule. We would guide. Humanity became something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, not conquerors, not emperors, but architects of the future. We did not impose our will through fleets and armies. We did not demand submission or obedience. Instead, we used the greatest weapon we had ever created, the one that had brought down the Dominion itself, the power of an idea. Through whispers, through alliances, through unseen influence, we shaped the fractured remains of the galaxy. We helped rebuild what had been lost, not as rulers, but as advisors, engineers, mentors. We did not conquer planets, but we ensured that those who did would follow a path of stability, of cooperation, of progress. We became the unseen force behind the rise of new civilizations. The quiet hand that guided the reconstruction of fallen worlds. The unknown power that ensured that no empire would ever again rise to crush the weak beneath its boot. The galaxy never knew the full extent of our influence. They saw us as a species that had won its war and then vanished into the background, choosing peace over power. They never realized how much we had shaped their fate, how many wars we prevented before they began, how many leaders we steered toward unity instead of conflict. And those who did realize the truth, they feared us more than they had ever feared the Dominion, because the Dominion had ruled with brute force, with fleets and armies, with oppression and control. But humanity had done something far more terrifying. We had won a war without firing a shot. We had destroyed an empire with an idea, and now we ruled the galaxy, without ever needing to rule at all. The old powers, those who had once plotted against us, now found themselves playing a game they could not understand. They tried to resist, tried to build alliances against the unseen force that was reshaping the stars, but they never knew where to strike, never knew who was truly in control, and the best part? They never even saw us coming. This was the final war. Not a war of weapons, not a war of fleets, a war of minds, a war of whispers, a war fought in the shadows, with no battlefields, no grand invasions, no declarations of conquest. And in this war, humanity had already won. The Dominion was gone. The galaxy had changed forever. And at the center of it all was us, the most feared, most powerful, most dangerous species to ever walk among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same again.